Okay, so this is the Criterion B exemplar you guys were asked to mark in your groups. Start off by looking at the research question. I think that the research question is okay. It does sort of outline what the independent variable and dependent variable were for this lab. So how effective are a variety of antibiotics? That's what we were changing, was what was the different antibiotics at inhibiting the growth of E. coli. So our dependent variable is the growth of E. coli. And it does at least specify the type of bacteria, so there is a little bit of detail in there. But I think there are other details that could have been specified, like how is this growth going to be measured? So in our case, we are going to look at the exclusion zone and specifically the exclusion zone radius. So that detail could have been included, and other details about, what period of time this was going to be measured over, what conditions they were going to be grown under, like the temperature, because all of those things have an effect on how well bacteria will grow and how impactful the antibiotics will be. So it's important that your research question outlines the independent variable and dependent variable, but it needs some additional details to make it more focused. So that's the first part. I would give that research question, that's a solid 4 research question. It's clear enough, but it's missing some details to make it into the higher bands. If we move into the background information, there is a hypothesis. It's predicted that penicillin will be the least effective. So, that's sort of in the 3-4 level. But the main issue is that there's no mention of the other antibiotics. The research question outlines you're going to test a variety of antibiotics, and this one only specifies or touches on one of them. So that's just like a huge omission. If you were to say, I'm going to investigate all these different things, and then you only make a prediction about one, that's going to be a real problem. The other thing is that prediction isn't really backed up with any scientific reasoning. There's really only one detail in this whole background section about antibiotics and how they work scientifically, which is that the antibiotic will kill or inhibit the growth of bacteria. That's a very general bit of scientific reasoning. It's true, but it's not specific to penicillin. It's not specific to any of the other antibiotics. So there's not really any scientific reason for why penicillin would be the least effective that's outlined in this background info. The first paragraph is nice and sort of sets the stage, talking about E. coli, but it's not really relevant. It's not going to get you any credit in terms of your score on B1. It's just sort of some real world context of the bacteria and infections caused by that bacteria. So it's fine if you want to have a little introduction like that, but it's not going to earn you any points, even if it contains some nice citations or facts about what you're talking about. So I think this scientific background information section is really pretty weak then in terms of the criteria. So it's really borderline 1, 2, 3, 4. So overall strand B1, we're probably looking at about a level 3 in this case. And it's not that the person didn't write nicely. It has the right parts, like the hypothesis and the question, but it really is lacking in explaining scientifically why the prediction is the way it is. So that's the thing to remember going forward. Okay, then we turn our attention to the method. We do see the materials list is there, and there's some safety notes, which are mostly pretty good. They could include some more details, like about numbers and things in the materials list, but that's really not the problem. We get down here, strand B2 is about independent and dependent variable. I think dependent variable isn't bad. It talks about the exclusion zone width, so we've gotten a little more specific than the research question in identifying that we're looking at the width of something. And you can sort of see in the picture, I think originally maybe there was a little width identified. I think it would be better if instead of width it said radius, since we're talking about a circle more than likely. Identifying that it's a radius is better. The unit in this case probably would have been millimeters, so specifying the unit. Now it does say the distance between the edge of the antibiotic disc to the edge of where bacteria growth is evident. So that helps. So that's a pretty good level of detail. I think directing you to this picture would have been even better. And you should say what kind of equipment it would use. So obviously in this case we're measuring length, we're probably going to use a ruler, but more details about the method are necessary to make this thing fully complete. So the dependent variable section, I would say that's pretty good. It's level 5, 6. There is some description of how things are going to be done. So pretty good. It's not all the way there, but it's solid. In the first one, independent variable, so identity of antibiotic. Yep, so that's good. It's been identified right. It says, I will place one disc of each antibiotic on the Petri dish, and everyone in my class will do it the same way. Well, what is that way? This method doesn't really outline the method for laying them out on the dish, right? So is there a particular order that you're going to lay them out in? Is there a particular distance that you're going to have between them? There's nothing about that. There's a lot of lacking detail here in terms of how you're actually going to place the discs around the plate. So dependent variable, I would say, is about a level 5, 6, but independent is back down in sort of 3, 4. It's really very vague. Just saying I'm going to vaguely place them down on the disc does not ensure that anyone else could follow your method and do it the same way as you. So remember, that's sort of your guiding principle. If I handed this method off to someone, they could carry out the method in the same way as me. Okay, and last one, control variables. So yeah, so for B2, that other part, I'd probably give it in the 3, 4 category overall, really because the independent variable part is so lacking in detail. Dependent variable 5, 6, so we're kind of on the 4, 5 borderline for that section. And then control variables, distribution of the E. coli colonies. They do talk about the spreading method. I think that this would have been stronger if it had included something like we did, which was to use the micro pipette, where we dropped a particular volume, maybe it was 100 microliters or something like that, where you could actually add the exact same amount of bacteria solution to the plate. Now that's a really good way to control exactly how much bacteria you're adding to the dish. And then the spreading is also an important idea. So the spreading was fine, but I think how much bacteria colonies they added initially was kind of lacking. Then you've got some detail about the conditions, like 2 days and 25 degrees Celsius, but again, it doesn't really say how they're going to achieve the 25 degrees Celsius, like putting it in an oven. So that's kind of lacking, so the equipment's lacking. And then the antibiotic levels, the dosages correspond to medically recommended levels. Now, I think that it would have been really thoughtful here if the person had pointed out that, okay, yes, maybe these are medically recommended levels, but actually these levels are all very different, especially the kanamycin at 1,000 micrograms compared to the other ones. And so it's not that this is something that you would be expected to be able to fix or control better, but pointing out that it was a limitation. So one of the things about a good method or a good criterion B is that you show thoughtfulness and you realize if there's something that you can't properly control. So I think pointing out that the antibiotic levels are not controlled, that you can't change them, and that might be a real problem for how reliable your results are, would be better than trying to state that they were controlled, even when they're not really. So I think that was the part here that I thought could have used a little more focus. Okay, so pointing out limitations when you can't actually control something is just as valid as trying to point out the things that you can control. And finally, part of criterion B3 is explaining why these different factors need to be controlled. What is their relevance scientifically? Why do we need to ensure the distribution of the colonies or the different conditions or the antibiotic levels? So giving some scientific reasoning as to why those things need to be controlled. So I think control variables in terms of method was okay, missing some important ideas about the volume added, the equipment used, and then missing that idea that this really wasn't controlled and there's nothing you could do about it, but showing your awareness of that lack of control. But then sort of a big omission is just talking about scientifically, why are these factors relevant? Why are they important? So I'd say the first strand was about a 3. Probably the worst part was strand B1. B2 was kind of a 4, 5. And B3 was also sort of a 3, 4 5/5, and mainly it lowered because there was no scientific reason given for controlling each variable. If there was a little bit more scientific reasoning, then there would have been some lacking details, but I think we could have said that was like 5/6. So with these ones, you're kind of on the border, but overall, because the B1's kind of low, you're still looking overall at probably like a 4 for this lab. So keep that in mind when you write your own Criterion Bs. We are going to be looking for a lot of detail, a lot of scientific explanation. You should be able to hand this lab off to somebody else, and they should be able to follow it and understand it exactly like you are.